When I was deep in the occult world, we talked about altars constantly: physical altars, symbolic altars, places where devotion was directed. We were taught something very specific: every sacrifice empowers something. At the time, I thought altars were always visible: candles, objects, ritual spaces, something you could point to. But after I left that life, I realized something far more dangerous. The most powerful altars are invisible, and most people don't even know they've built them. I'm not talking about wooden tables or secret rituals. I'm talking about patterns of devotion, because an altar is simply this: whatever consistently receives your time, your emotional energy, and your obedience. That's your altar. When I walked away from occult practices and began rebuilding my life, I thought I had removed every trace of darkness. But I hadn't, because the external rituals were gone. The internal altars remained, and they were quietly shaping my decisions, quietly draining my focus, quietly sabotaging my growth. No demons needed, no rituals required, just misplaced devotion. I learned something that shocked me. You don't need candles to build an altar. You build one every time you repeatedly sacrifice peace for validation, every time you sacrifice integrity for approval, every time you sacrifice discipline for comfort. And here's the urgent part: if you don't identify these altars early, they grow roots. They begin dictating your identity. They determine your habits. They determine your results. And by the time you realize what's happening, years may have passed. In this message, I'm going to reveal 3 hidden altars that almost destroyed my future after I left the occult world. They don't look dangerous. They don't feel dramatic. But if you don't remove them, they will quietly consume your potential. Before it's too late, in the next chapter, I'm going to expose the first one, and it hides behind something that feels completely normal. Chapter 2: Sikaya TWO, THE Altar OF Validit Ioan. The first hidden altar nearly ruined me after I left the occult world. And it didn't look dark, it looked harmless. It looked like influence. After I walked away from rituals and symbols, I told myself I was free. I wasn't bowing to objects anymore. I wasn't participating in ceremonies. I wasn't chasing forbidden knowledge. But I was still craving something: approval. When you leave a dramatic lifestyle, especially one built around intensity and identity, there's a vacuum that forms. You no longer have the same reactions from people. You're no longer mysterious. You're no longer shocking anyone. And if you're not careful, you'll build a new altar in that vacuum: the altar of validation. Here's how it works: you begin sacrificing authenticity for applause. You adjust your words to stay liked. You soften your convictions to avoid rejection. You over-explain yourself to maintain acceptance. And every time you do that, you're offering something, not to a physical altar, but to public opinion. I didn't see it at first. I thought I was just trying to rebuild credibility. I thought I was trying to do things the right way. But slowly, I noticed something. My decisions weren't guided by clarity, they were guided by reactions. How will this be received? Will this hurt my image? Will people still support me? That is devotion, because whatever controls your decision making has your loyalty. And validation is addictive. It feels safe, it feels affirming, it feels stabilizing, but it is unstable by nature. If your peace depends on applause, your identity will collapse the moment criticism arrives. I learned this the hard way. The more I chased approval, the more anxious I became, because approval is unpredictable. You cannot control it. You cannot secure it permanently. And the more you feed it, the hungrier it gets. That's what makes it an altar. It demands sacrifice. You sacrifice boldness. You sacrifice honesty. You sacrifice growth. Because growth requires discomfort, and validation resists discomfort. The moment I recognized this, I had to make a decision. Would I live directed by conviction or by crowd response? Because you cannot serve both. When I dismantled that altar, something powerful happened. My peace stabilized, not because everyone agreed with me, but because my decisions were no longer negotiated through fear of rejection. If you're constantly anxious about how you're perceived, constantly reshaping yourself to fit expectations, constantly measuring your worth through engagement, applause, or approval, you may have built this altar without realizing it, and it will quietly limit your future because you cannot step fully into purpose while kneeling to validation. In the next chapter, I'm going to reveal the second hidden altar, and this one hides behind something even more socially acceptable. Sichek tiata I, THELTAR OF Koomfar. The second hidden altar almost destroyed my discipline, and the terrifying part, everyone around me encouraged it. After leaving the occult world, I craved peace. I was tired of intensity, tired of chaos, tired of constantly pushing boundaries just to feel something. So, when life finally slowed down, I embraced comfort. At first, it felt healthy. More rest, more entertainment, less confrontation. But slowly something shifted. Comfort stopped being recovery and started becoming avoidance. That's how this altar forms. It doesn't demand dramatic sacrifice. It asks for small compromises. Skip the hard conversation. Delay the difficult task. Choose ease over discipline just this once. And just like that, you begin offering pieces of your potential. Comfort is not evil, but unchecked comfort is corrosive because growth requires friction. When you are stretching, building, healing, or rebuilding, it will feel uncomfortable. That discomfort is not punishment, it's expansion. But if you consistently choose comfort over capacity, you begin shrinking. I didn't notice it immediately. I thought I was protecting my peace. But in reality, I was protecting my limits. There were opportunities I avoided because they felt overwhelming, conversations I postponed because they felt tense, skills I delayed developing because they required effort. Each time, I told myself, I deserve rest, and rest is necessary, but I wasn't resting. I was retreating. That's when I realized something dangerous. Comfort had become my decision maker, and whatever determines your decisions becomes your altar. You sacrifice ambition, you sacrifice discipline, you sacrifice momentum. Because comfort rewards stagnation, it tells you that safety is success. But safety and growth rarely live in the same place. The moment I recognized this pattern, I had to confront myself. Was I rebuilding my life or building a smaller version of it to avoid pressure? The answer was uncomfortable, but necessary. When I started choosing disciplined action over temporary ease, something shifted again. Energy returned, clarity returned, momentum returned. If you feel stuck, delayed, or constantly postponing progress, ask yourself, am I honoring rest or worshiping comfort? There's a difference. One restores you, the other confines you, and if you don't dismantle the altar of comfort early, it will quietly shrink your future without ever feeling dramatic. In the next chapter, I'm going to expose the third hidden altar, and this one is the most deceptive of all because it disguises itself as strength. The third hidden altar was the hardest for me to admit because it looked like strength. After leaving the occult world, I promised myself some things. I would never be deceived again. I would never surrender my mind again. I would never let unseen influence dictate my life. That sounded wise, but slowly it turned into something else. Control. I began micromanaging everything. Every conversation had to go a certain way. Every plan had to unfold on my timeline. Every outcome had to match my expectations. If something shifted unexpectedly, anxiety surged. Why? Because control had become my security, and whatever you depend on for security becomes an altar. Here's what control demands as sacrifice: it demands trust, it demands flexibility, it demands humility. You sacrifice collaboration because you believe only you can ensure stability. You sacrifice peace because you are constantly scanning for variables. You sacrifice growth because growth requires risk, and risk threatens control. I justified it as responsibility. I'm just being careful. I'm just protecting what I've built. I'm just making sure nothing collapses. But beneath that language was fear: fear of unpredictability, fear of loss, fear of being vulnerable again. When you've experienced chaos in your past, control feels like survival. But survival is not the same as freedom. I didn't notice how tight I had become until small things started triggering disproportionate reactions. Minor delays felt like threats. Small changes felt like instability. That's when I recognized it. I wasn't managing my life, I was gripping it. And gripping creates tension. Control convinces you that if you hold tight enough, nothing can go wrong. But in reality, excessive control isolates you. People feel it, opportunities feel it, even your own creativity feels it. Because control resists the unknown, and every meaningful breakthrough involves the unknown. When I finally dismantled that altar, I had to practice something deeply uncomfortable: release. Not irresponsibility, not passivity, but release of the illusion that I could guarantee outcomes. I focused on preparation instead of prediction, on effort instead of outcomes, on discipline instead of domination. And something surprising happened. My anxiety decreased, my relationships strengthened, my decisions became clearer, because I was no longer negotiating every move through fear of losing control. If you feel exhausted from constantly trying to manage every variable in your life, if you struggle to delegate, trust, or adapt, if unpredictability feels threatening instead of neutral, you may have built this altar without realizing it, and it will quietly rob you of peace. In the final chapter, I'm going to bring all three together and show you how to remove these altars before they harden into identity, before it's too late. Here's the part no one told me when I left the occult world. Removing external rituals is easy. Removing internal altars is war. Because by the time you recognize them, they don't feel foreign, they feel like you. Validation feels like personality. Comfort feels like peace. Control feels like responsibility. That's what makes them dangerous. They merge with identity. And once an altar merges with identity, you stop questioning it. You defend it. When someone challenges your need for approval, you call them insensitive. When someone challenges your avoidance, you call it self care. When someone challenges your grip on outcomes, you call it wisdom. But beneath those justifications is devotion. And devotion always shapes destiny. I had to sit with a brutal question. What have I been consistently sacrificing? Because altars are built through repetition, repeated compromise, repeated avoidance, repeated fear based decisions. That's how they grow roots. And if you let them grow long enough, they start deciding your future without your awareness. Here's how I began dismantling them. First, I exposed them with honesty, not dramatic prayer, not emotional intensity, honesty. I crave approval. I avoid discomfort. I fear losing control. Naming the altar weakens it. Second, I replace devotion with discipline. Instead of chasing validation, I practice conviction, making decisions based on clarity, not applause. Instead of choosing comfort automatically, I schedule discomfort, hard conversations, disciplined habits, structured growth. Instead of gripping outcomes, I focused on preparation, doing my part, and releasing what I cannot control. And slowly, the anxiety decreased, the overthinking decreased, the hesitation decreased. Because when an altar falls, clarity returns. Here's the urgency. If you don't remove these altars early, they solidify into identity. And once identity forms around them, change becomes 10 times harder. You will call validation who I am. You will call comfort how I function. You will call control how I survive. And years will pass. Potential will shrink quietly. Peace will feel distant. Not because something external attacked you, but because something internal ruled you. I say this with intensity because I lived it. The occult world taught me about visible altars. Life taught me about invisible ones. And the invisible ones are more destructive. You don't need dramatic rituals to lose your direction. You just need unexamined devotion. So before it's too late, ask yourself, what consistently gets my obedience? What fear shapes my decisions? What pattern do I defend even when it costs me growth? That's where the altar is. And the moment you see it clearly, you are no longer powerless. Because awareness breaks illusion. And once illusion breaks, freedom becomes possible. Not dramatic, not mystical, intentional. Tear them down now, before they quietly become you.